You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. This week, I'm going into some thoughts on my career journey and current projects. I'll dive into a few areas of this that stood out to me this week after speaking to a class of 8th graders. These are things I hope to continue taking forward, helping me focus on the truly valuable goals rather than the less important details. Then, if you've been around my content long, you know I love some learning, and I happen across follow-up content from a previous week and a new product in the space for scaling graphs. Let me share the details. To start us off, earlier in the week, I spoke for an 8th grade careers class, and some of the students raised some really good questions. Things like, what was my favorite activity in my job? What was my most challenging activity in my day-to-day? Something that I really focus on in this presentation is my career journey overall, the highlights, the challenges, and different things. Thinking on that, though, there are some general themes that have cropped up again and again for me, and I want to share some of those with you. These are good reminders for myself as well as I look into what are some of the next challenges that I want to tackle or some things that I want to work on. First off, most of my experiences and credentials aren't because I was properly or officially trained on something. Now, there's a lot of people who will back this up, especially in the tech industry. There's a lot of variation in the way that people are trained and even just get hired on in the tech industry. There's a lot more flexibility than maybe some other industries and job titles out there. But the biggest thing here is that credentials aren't necessarily required, at least in my experience. It's things like saying yes to different types of opportunities, and then pulling on some different threads, looking at projects or learnings or ways to expand your knowledge or your network or different challenges that you're looking at. It's very easy, though, to focus too much when most people's careers are built over a long period of time. For instance, looking at some mega presences in the tech industry or in certain spaces wherever you happen to be specializing. And this is a quote I've heard, it's easy to compare their middle to your beginning. So basically, this person has built this large thing, this presence, this market, this company, this whatever it is you're aspiring after them for, and you're trying to start at the very beginning and build something like that, right? You want to mimic that success or that financial stability or whatever it happens to be. But you're just starting out. You can't snap your fingers and end up there. As an example for me, I didn't start out my career with a tech blog and a tech podcast and tech books that I have authored and a tech website, my own website that I maintain. I didn't start out with any of that. It was all a very slow progression. Over the last several years in the industry and throughout my learning, I've slowly just tacked on an additional thing. For instance, I started a tech blog years ago now and built up a pretty good rapport of writing and technical content there. And then when I felt like I had that well under wraps and I felt comfortable there and I was enjoying it, I was like, well, tech podcasting is kind of cool. I've always wanted to host a podcast and play around in those spaces as well. It's another medium, maybe a slightly different aspect of the content that I haven't gotten to play with yet. I'd like to do that sometime. And then a couple summers ago, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start this up and do it. And I did. And it's been a lot of fun. Tech authorship, it was not something I originally had on my radar. I knew that technical writing is a ton of work and it's hard to maintain. But I started out with an ebook late last winter. And now I'm looking at a major tech book that hopefully will be released this year. It's over the course of the years, I started to look at new things I was interested in, new challenges I wanted to tackle, and just slowly started pulling threads. I've always wanted to do this anyway. I'm going to take this opportunity and go with it. So this is all a progression. Remember that no matter where you want to end up, sometimes it's looking at a potential opportunity. I think it's good to keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to be officially trained or prepared. I've built these skills over time, and I enjoy sharing what I've learned in my experiences in the space. It's a good thing to remember that not one of us is more qualified or less qualified than somebody else to provide your experience. Now, that doesn't mean you have to come in and say, this is the way to build this application. Maybe not necessarily. That might differ depending on the situation, the use case and domain, etc. Lots of variables going into that. But you can say, in my experience, this has worked really well. Or, hey, I saw some challenges or some struggles when I went this route. Maybe we should go this route instead. So again, I think we each have a very unique and very powerful voice just in the experiences or the learnings that we do have so far. We're constantly evolving and changing and improving our knowledge over time. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about is how to find a project to work on. In school, I really felt like this was something that was extremely frustrating. Everything that I read, everybody that I talked to, the advice was just build something. Well, that's great. But when you're a poor college student and you don't know what to build or you don't know what to tackle, it feels a little bit overwhelming and very vague. When you look at courses or blog posts, etc., the tasks were very open-ended and they always felt a little bit unreachable or a little vague. Or often at the time, things cost to trial or to build with. So for instance, I wanted to look at a particular technology, but I needed to have a certain type of machine in order to support that technology, or I needed to pay a subscription fee in order to get access to that service, etc. My answer to this is to continue to read and grow. Those are easy, free resources that you can expand your knowledge, whether that's reading blog posts or content or newsletters or listening to podcasts or videos. There's lots of different channels and mediums that you can access content now. You could also find someone to build something with. Sometimes just bouncing ideas off of somebody else is really helpful. Now, if you don't have really close tech friends or people to bounce ideas off of, that's fine. You don't feel obligated that you have to find necessarily a community to do this with. But sometimes just chatting with everyday people and interacting with friends and family members, you might come across something. It's like, you know what? That really is missing in the space. Maybe there's a gap there. Maybe that's something I could play around with. Why hasn't somebody built this thing before? Another thing is to just explore a technology. Now, this is often one that I felt like at the time was way more challenging, and I actually find it much easier now. It could be because there's a lot more free trials and free materials and resources for playing around with things that didn't used to exist. Or it could also be that I'm in the space and constantly evaluating and playing with new technologies, so I just find this easier because of my day-to-day routines. But either way, I would encourage you to try to look for something. What's this thing? I don't know much about this type of technology, or I don't know much about this type of database or data pipeline or tool or whatever it is, and just play around with some things. Again, easier said than done, I'm sure. But this is something that I've exercised this muscle over time, and it has gotten easier over time. I also think producing something, even content, can help you narrow down some threads to pull on. As an example, even now, I wouldn't know which topic of Cypher to focus on next. For instance, if I was just learning Cypher and wanted to figure out how to better use it, I wouldn't know, hey, I need to go down this particular route, or I need to learn this thing next, or I need to learn about pattern matching or filtering or algorithms or whatever it is, before I would run into a performance issue and naturally end up heading down towards a path of query tuning and performance optimization. So my natural exploration and usage of the tool actually guides me into the thing that I need to explore or learn next. Sometimes thinking out loud too, whether that's with someone or while you are writing or podcasting or videoing, can also lead you to the next thing. For instance, sometimes I come up with really great topics just by recording this podcast. I will sit down and work through a situation or a topic and realize that, hey, that's actually something I should focus in on and do a little bit more digging on. And sometimes that's inspiration for the content that I share in future weeks. Sometimes that's inspiration for the projects that I work on or the rabbit holes that I go down in my learning journey and the projects that I build. It varies. And sometimes just talking out loud, again, whether that's to someone else or just for the content you're already working on, can be really helpful for generating some of these ideas and finding these different threads to pull. This is actually something I've been thinking on a lot lately, trying to find a project to work on that blends both value and fun. Sometimes I think it's just charging in on something and kind of figuring it out along the way. Sometimes easier said than done, I do realize. But also being stuck in indecision and not sure which way to go isn't great either, because you never make any progress at that point. I am exploring a couple of different avenues. I'm toying with a few things and dabbling with a few things. We will see what learning results from those and where I end up, but I will keep you posted along the way from that journey. The content pieces that I wanted to cover this week, the first one is I talked about last week how there was a really great chapter in the Neo4j Definitive Guide O'Reilly book. And a colleague had sent me a Cypher workshop a couple of weeks ago and asked me to review it when I had time. And I just never picked it back up, gotten busy doing other things. So early this week, I thought, you know what, I've got a little bit of a gap. I'm going to go ahead and knock this out and review this content, send the feedback back, but also see what this is all about and see what I can learn from it. And actually, it was really cool. It ended up with a little bit of serendipity here because it covers a ton of the same topics as the book that I talked about last week, that chapter 5 in the O'Reilly book, Neo4j, the Definitive Guide. But this is a free hands-on online course version of it. So if you're interested in this, I would highly recommend you go out and check out this Graph Academy online free course. I will link that in the show notes. But this talks about a lot of the same concepts, of course, from a different perspective and use case, but a lot of those same performance concepts of using explain and profile and filtering early and all sorts of other things that I talked about in the content piece last week. This course covers those same concepts as well, but of course, just in a different format. This was really cool. I had a lot of fun doing it. This was already something that I found was really cool and another resource. And now I have yet another place that I can go and find this content and of course, share that with all of you as well. The last thing I want to talk about is we just had Nodes AI, which is Neo4j's online developer conference. We normally run that in the fall, and that runs a full 24 hours of content all around the globe. In the spring, we decided to do a little bit of a smaller version of that and focus wholly in on AI, and not quite the 24 hours. It was, maybe 8 hours long of content or so. And I found one session in particular that I picked out, which I find a little bit unusual for me. It's a product, and it's a Neo4j product that is talking about scaling. The session was called Infinigraph, Vector Data at Scale. I will link the whole YouTube playlist for Nodes AI. However, a lot of the videos aren't up on that yet. So I will also link the Nodes AI agenda and webpage if you want to check out maybe just the description and short summary of that, and keep an eye out for the video. And then I'll also link a blog post to tide you over as well that talks a little bit more about this technology. But going back to the video, I watched this during the event and I just really found it cool. It's really hard with all of the new stuff at Neo4j to keep up with everything that's coming at us. And this was a really interesting look at Neo4j's new sharding capabilities. A bit of a side tour first before I talk a little bit more about the video. Back when I joined Neo4j in 2018, Neo4j only had a couple of products, plus lots of tools and extraneous extensions, etc. So I learned a decent amount about much of what we had. Now, though, product surface is much larger. We're a much bigger company, offer a lot more things, and it's impossible to stay on top of it all, especially to any depth. So I try to keep my toes and my brain on the surface level of what's going on and what things are happening and the features and new cool things that are out there. But I can only focus in on certain things at one particular time, as most of us, right? Anyway, even if you're not in an enterprise who is interested in shelling out budget for something like the Infinigraph product at Neo4j, what I always find really interesting is to view the problem and see how a particular technology solves it. Sometimes it's just cool to learn how something works, and this was one of those situations. All right, so what is Infinigraph? Graph databases, Neo4j included, used to get the comment that they don't scale. This was because graphs are incredibly hard to horizontally scale due to the relationships that connect the data together. If you think about it, breaking apart the value proposition of graphs, which is the connections, and then construct those paths back across different shards, that's join hell if you think about it, and totally defeats the design of graph databases. Sigh, I digress. Let me get back to the point. All right, so this was a common problem that people were coming across, large enterprises were struggling with. Neo4j eventually put together a solution to deal with this called federated graphs. This was horizontal scaling, which worked pretty well. I never got super steeped in this area, but it did feel complex and like perhaps a lot of overhead, but it probably was a good initial tackle of the problem. Now, however, Neo4j has revamped this and completely come out with something new called Neo4j Infinigraph. And this seems like a much better solution. The video goes into details on this, but you can read some blog posts and, of course, find out more information about that in Neo4j content circles. But basically, the bulk of Neo4j storage gets tied up with properties. Node properties, relationship properties, these are the metadata that get tied back to your nodes and relationships, and often are big text blobs or dates or JSON or whatever it happens to be that you store on the nodes and relationships. Now, Infinigraph extracts those properties to separate shards and keeps the graph, basically the connected data structure, on one graph shard. In the video, the presenter, Hannah, walks through the architecture, how it works. Then she shows an example of how it works as well. The speaker was really knowledgeable and helpful in presenting all the details about it. I thought this was a really well done session and just really interesting in the problem that it was trying to solve and how it goes about it, and just new and inventive solutions for things that we've tried to solve in the past. And now this seems like a really great option and solution for this. This week, I presented for an 8th grade career class that had me reviewing my own career and some particular themes that continue to surface. Then I came across more Cypher optimization content that reinforced content I had read last week and in a free and different format. Finally, I learned about Infinigraph and how it is solving the challenge of horizontally scaling big graphs to make them more manageable and performant. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.